Hi, and welcome to Ruby's Ask Me Anything office hours. I'm Chef Dan Merrick. I'm the Director of Plant-Based Culinary and Development, and I'm here today to answer any questions you have culinary related. A little bit of housekeeping to start out. You'll see a little box to the right-hand side of this video, and you can add questions in that little box. If you have the question, you just type it in there, and then you hit add, and then we'll moderate the question, and it'll show up on the bottom right of the screen. Now, if there's a question that you see on the right side of the screen there that you'd like to be answered first, you can always hit the little heart icon next to it, and it'll bring it further up into the queue. Now, that being said, let's dive right in and start answering some questions. Our first question is from Rosie. How do you create a main dish that has more crunch and firm texture? Eating whole food plant-based, uh, most of this food is soft. We miss the crunch. Thank you. So this, actually, you can do a lot of different things in a whole food plant-based, meals that are very crunchy. I think that adding certain ingredients to your meals would probably be a good place to kind of start with that. And think of like nuts and seeds are wonderful, but you can also do things like dehydrate things, and you can dehydrate them using a dehydrator, or sometimes you can use an air fryer, or simply an oven to be able to dehydrate things. Some of those things could be, very crunchy. Like if you want to do beans, you could actually do chickpeas are a fun thing to kind of oven roast or something like that to be able to put a little seasoning on the outside. They dry up, become really, really crunchy. You can put them onto your salads and different meals as well, too. You can also get crunchy, outsides of things by roasting. So if you're actually roasting different vegetables in your oven or roasting tofu, you can get a nice crispy edge and that caramelization that'll happen on the outside to get that crispy edge that you're kind of looking for. So if you are looking for that kind of texture, there's a lot of things you can actually do it from cooked or raw. If you think about the crunchiness of something like celery, you get a lot of crunch and a lot of different flavors that can kind of come through those. But first and foremost, if you're looking to be able to add some of the things you were looking for before in there, just remember you can use some of the same techniques like roasting, air frying. A lot of those techniques will help add some of those textures into it to be able to add that caramelization and that texture to the food that you're cooking. So I hope that helps, Rosie. If you want something a little more specific, you can always ask further down in the queue on techniques for something like that. Diane, I'm usually cooking just for me. Can you suggest some quick sauces I can make for a plain meal that it won't have to eat again all week? Yeah, that's a great question, Diane. So, my first inclination is to go towards like a pesto or maybe a chimichurri, right? So, pesto is a very easy, super simple sauce to be able to make. And I'll usually do mine with like half spinach and half basil. But the great thing is that you can put as much as or a little as you want into it. You don't have to make a ton of pesto. Um, you will see that the spinach, and the basil break down very quickly, just like if you were sautéing them. So you'll need a little bit more than you might think, but it breaks down really nice. And you can either use pine nuts or walnuts. I usually use lemon juice, and I actually add a little bit of orange juice just for the sweet, to be able to cancel out the bitterness in that. If I'm not using oil, if you are using oil, you can just use that instead of the orange juice as well. And I'm talking just a very small amount. For chimichurris, kind of the same way, a little roasted red pepper and different herbs, and kind of blend that up to be able to make as much or as little as you want. Now, for some of these, like say the chimichurri, you might not want to use the whole roasted red pepper. Now you can use that ingredient for something else, but not make just the sauce, right? So you can have, just enough of that roasted red pepper for your sauce to be able to dice it up. But then can use the roasted red pepper for a different recipe as an ingredient in something else. So I think the big part of that is just being able to downsize the amount of sauce that you're actually making one of those. And that should work for most recipes that you're doing. You might just need to find a use for the other ingredients. So you might want to shy away from something like like a pasta sauce that's like a red sauce, because you're typically opening like a can of tomatoes or something like that. That's fine if you can figure out what to do with the rest of those tomatoes. But if you don't have a use purpose for those, you might want to think of outside the box a little bit, or outside the can, and kind of think of ways to be able to repurpose the rest of the ingredients that you're putting into the sauces, and then make a smaller amount of sauce just for you. Hope that helps. All right, Rosie. Hi, Chef Dan. Are tomatoes always seeded? Why? Is it because the seeds' interior parts have nutritional value? Actually, no. The seeds for most plants actually have a lot of nutritional value in them. And you can find tomatoes that are seedless, just like a watermelon. They've been crafted basically by people to be able to do that. Now, naturally, tomatoes do have seeds. It's how they, populate more. But they have genetically modified tomatoes to have no seeds in them as well, and to be able to have more kind of meat on the inside instead of the kind of juicy seed part on the inside. They do use a lot of those for doing different sauces, for tomato pastes as well, to be able to make sure that there aren't any seeds in there. So you definitely can get seedless tomatoes. They're a little harder to find at your standard grocery store, but they do exist. I traditionally, don't mind the seeds as much. If you're looking for something just to be able to get rid of those, you can always cut the tomato in half or quarter and then remove the intersection if you want to. You can always make something else out of it as well, too. But there is definitely nutritional value in those seeds. Most seeds actually have a pretty high nutritional value in them as well. Another question from Rosie. Why is some form of sweetener, paste, liquid sweeteners added to dressings? I don't like to do sweet dressings, plus I prefer not to get used to the sweet taste. That's actually just, you don't have to use the sweetener if you don't want them. um, for a lot of the dressings that I think you're referring to, they might have vinegar that's added to them, and a lot of people don't like the bitterness of the vinegar. So you'll usually add a sweetness to kind of offset that. So the whole, savory or salty sweet kind of thing, kind of that medium kind of comes into that, right? So you're looking to be able to offset the vinegar with a little bit of sweet, so it's not as bitter as you're eating it. So that's typically why people are adding a certain sweetener to a dressing. But yeah, but that doesn't mean you have to add them in there. What I would do is actually make the dressing that you're talking about and just don't add the sweetener part of it and taste it, see what you think. And then you can slowly add a little bit of that sweetener to it if you want to, like the paste or the liquid sweeteners. Hope that helps, Rosie. All right, Diane. What kind of device do you use to moisten vegetables while roasting without oil? I tried a spoon and silicone pastry brush to add broth under Brussels sprouts. It helped the brown side. It helped brown the cut side on the parchment, but the top dried out and took a long time to cook through. Yeah, so that's. I typically am going to use a spoon on this as well. So, but a trick with this, particularly with the Brussels sprouts, is to flip the Brussels sprout. You are going to get that browning on the bottom of them because that's hitting the hottest part of the pan. So you're going to get that caramelization on the bottom of the pan where the Brussels sprout is touching that pan. And it's actually the hottest part, right, is right into that parchment paper. But if you flip it over, you'll actually expose that as well, too. Sometimes what I'll actually do is I'll keep the Brussels sprouts with the cut side up, start roasting it that way, and I'll drizzle, the broth over the top with just a spoon as well. You could do all kinds of other techniques for it, but I'll usually, have the cut side up and then flip them and get that caramelization on the bottom to be able to help them cook through a little bit quicker. And usually what I have to do is just shake the pan a little bit and it flips them all so they're all, the flat side down. Now, the spoon is the one that I use the most. A silicone pastry brush won't really hold the broth very well, so a spoon really helps. You might be able to do something like if you want to get fancy and use like a food safe spray bottle or something like that with your broth in it, but you will get particulates kind of caught in the spray thing, just to be careful of that as well. You might just need to wash it out every so often, but a spoon is probably my best bet to be able to tell you to do that. All right, Natalie, I'm curious about carob. I recall it being the chocolate substitution in the 70s and 80s, and I used it especially in baking chips form. Are there any nutritional reasons to reincorporate it into my life? Well, yes, you totally could. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. So really the biggest differences between cocoa and like carob flour is that cocoa powder has a lot more fat in it. It's like 13 to 20% fat, where carob is about 1% fat. But on the opposite, there's more sugar in carob than there is in cocoa powder. So there's about 2% sugar in a cocoa powder versus a carob powder having about 50% sugar. So it's just naturally going to be a lot sweeter. Both of them are really rich in fiber. Cocoa has, I guess, more magnesium and zinc in it, where carob would actually have more calcium in it as well. But they're both great antioxidants, great things to be able to cook with. But the fat versus the sugar thing is usually the reason that people kind of flip it back and forth between that. And that is probably the reason that most people in the 70s and 80s were more focused on the carob, because people were looking at more zero fat products, right? That was really the big boom then, was to be able to go with a zero fat product. So a lot of people were looking at the carob versus the cacao or chocolate. But if that intrigues you, you want to do it, that's a great thing to be able to switch off there. Again, that carob is just going to be a little bit sweeter than the cacao, or the cocoa powder. Both of the cacao and the cocoa as well. So hope that helps. All right. From can you say a few words about roasting vegetables in an air fryer? Thanks. It's, uh, I would really like to learn from these. Oh, you really like to learn from these delightful Q&A sessions, from both the questions and the answers. Glad to be able to help. So, roasting vegetables in an air fryer. That's actually a great thing to be able to do. Air fryers are basically, like, essentially think of it like a convection oven, but on a very small scale, right? So, um, in a lot of American households, they don't have convection ovens, and what a convection oven does is it heats, but it also circulates air going through it. So the air is actually moving at all times, versus a regular bake function on an oven is basically just a heating element on the bottom, either an electric or a fire element that's on the bottom. And what it's doing is heating up and from the bottom and letting the heat rise. And it just continues to basically do that, where it's heating from the bottom. And what you get is I guess consistent to a point, but it's also pretty inconsistent. If you actually have the air moving and circulating, it's actually going to cook it a lot faster, and it's going to help to, like, have that caramelization, that Maillard effect around the entire product instead of just on one side of it. Now that's what the air fryers really utilize, is they have a working fan on the inside and heat up the entire thing to a very higher temperature typically. And that circulation of the air is what's actually doing the air fryer. Now, if you're on a whole food plant-based diet, you don't technically need to use oil in an air fryer, which most brands do recommend it, but it's not necessarily needed on them. So you can absolutely do a no oil cooking in an air fryer and do the roasting process as well. Now, that being said, I would definitely coat it with a little bit something to the moisture on the outside, and season it as you're going into it, put it into it and check it. I would check it about halfway through, maybe move the basket around a little bit to be able to loosen it up, and make sure that all sides are getting that cooked side and that caramelization that you're looking for. Hope that helps. I'm glad to be so useful through the sessions. All right, Tuki. So I need help with no oil cooking. I tried an onion in my stainless steel pan burn. Any tips? That's actually a wonderful segment. I'm going to hand this over to Patrick, because we have a couple wonderful videos on no oil cooking, specifically in stainless steel pans, and what to look for and what to watch out for while doing no oil sauteing in a stainless steel pan. So I'll let Patrick take this away with a video.
As the pan heats up, we'll add about 1/8 of a teaspoon of water every 10 to 15 seconds. As you can see, if the pan is cold, the water won't do anything. But as the pan heats up, the water will start to steam and then eventually bubble. As it continues to heat, it will steam and bubble even quicker. Soon the bubbles will start to evaporate as soon as the water hits the pan. Eventually, when the water is added, it starts to evaporate and disperse into smaller beads of water. As the pan nears the proper temperature, it will start to form a ball, almost like a mercury ball that floats on the surface. If there are still many smaller balls, wipe the pan dry, wait a few more seconds, and try again. When the pan is at the proper temperature, The mercury-like ball will form almost immediately with no or very few other smaller balls of water. If the water spurts immediately and disperses quickly like this is an indicator that the pan is too hot. Allow the pan to cool slightly and then continue with the water test until you reach the mercury ball stage. As soon as you reach this stage, your pan is at the perfect temperature to proceed. This is one of the main reasons why mise en place is so important when cooking. As the metal heats, the molecules begin to expand and move in all directions. This movement causes the pores in the metal to open and close. Here we're using peppercorns to simulate the pores of the metal. As the pan begins to heat up, the peppercorns begin to move sporadically. At this stage, the pan is not hot enough. If food is added at this point, these opening and closing pores would bite and latch onto the food's tissue, which would cause the food to stick or even tear. Cooking aromatics or mirepoix, such as onions with no oil, is an essential cooking technique to build flavor and lighten up a dish. To dry sauté, meaning to sauté using no oil, heat an appropriate size fry pan over medium to medium-high heat. Here you can see the pan is at the right temperature because the added water forms a mercury-like ball on the surface of the pan. At this point, the onions can be added. Stir regularly to ensure the onions do not burn. As they cook, you will notice that the onions as well as the pan will start to brown. Note, this same method can be used to sweat onions as well. In this case, once you add the onions, simply turn down the heat to prevent the onions from taking on any color. Continue to cook and stir until the onions become somewhat translucent. At this point, any delicate aromatics such as garlic can be added. Let cook for only a few seconds to avoid burning, then immediately add the liquid. Here we have used stock, however water, wine, or even vinegar could be used, depending on what you are making. Continue to stir and allow the onions to cook until most of the liquid is evaporated. At this point, you can proceed with whatever you are making.
All right. So hopefully that helped out, Toki. That's a very standard video we use for our whole food plant-based cooking courses. So if you're taking one of those, there usually is you can usually find that in the course. So if you want to go back and review it, you can also, if you're not in that course, find it in our free lessons that we offer, and that's the Introduction to the Forks Over Knives courses. So you can always take a look at that video if you need to review it right there. All right, Jane is next here. Hello, chef. How far in advance can you chop shallots or onions without compromising flavor? Um, I missed. Sorry. Preparing a canopy party. This question's for general meal prep too. So onions and shallots, you can totally chop them ahead of time. Most people would say 5 days is the most you can, but I'm gonna go less than that. I would say 1 to 2 days ahead of time to be able to make sure you're not compromising the flavor. You still have the texture that you're originally starting with, right? So, in order to keep those two things in, I would say 1 to 2 days, depending on what you're doing. If you're just doing it for a canopy party, that's totally fine. They'll last that, and they'll be able to be fine with that as well. The important thing is that you do keep them refrigerated, and you do keep them in an airtight container. This could be something as simple as, a plastic baggie or that seals, or a Ziploc or something like that, or putting them in a sealable airtight container. Just try to keep as much air out of them as possible, and they'll last a little bit longer as well. I see your follow-up is what's your go-to canapé. My probably is going to be a bruschetta of some sort, where I will, usually a bruschetta, I'm going to do like a tomato, basil, like shallot, and maybe like I might do like an olive or something onto it. But I'll also do something like a mushroom, kind of onion, parsley, and garlic, maybe roasted garlic onto it. One of my other favorites is to do a white bean puree. So I'll actually do white beans and roast garlic before that, puree into it, and a couple other ingredients if you want to. Now, usually for my canapes, I'm going to use a baguette or something similar to that. And I'll actually broil the bread really quickly. I'll slice it and then broil it so you get a nice black crispiness onto it as well. Just adds that extra depth of flavor to it. So that's probably my go-to for those. And another one from Jane. I've been making broth for my vegetable scraps. Sometimes it's a little bitter, and I'm not sure what I put my scraps in that causes. Any suggestions? It's interesting that sometimes it's a little bitter. Now that might be depending on what you're putting into it. Like if you put a little bit of carrot into it, it'll probably sweeten it up a little bit to be able to get rid of that bitterness. So maybe like I use the peelings from carrots all the time in my and like the ends basically of the carrots and the peelings of carrots in mine. And I constantly have red pepper cores and red pepper tops. Now, if you had just red pepper cores and a lot of tops, that could cause it to be bitter. So to be able to offset with a little bit of sweet from the carrot actually helps quite a bit. Now, I always also have my onion peels on the outside. It's kind of the thing I usually have the most of. And then I'll also typically throw in some dried mushrooms if I don't already have mushrooms, like scraps from mushrooms, like either the cores from a portobello mushroom, not the gills, though, just the cores of the portobello, or the stems from shiitakes. I'll typically have those into it as well. But if I don't, I'll usually add a couple dried shiitakes in there just to be able to kind of round out the flavor in it and also make it a nice color and a dark stock on that. But probably the bitterness is probably from just one of a lot of ingredient. It might be the harder part of it. Like the core or the stem might make it a little bitter. So adding something like the carrot peelings will probably help to be able to sweeten that up a little bit and not go overly sweet, of course. All right, here's one from Diane. Do you know what type of pan they're using in the demos? Brand, material? Can pans age out? So I'm not sure the exact brand that they're using in the video. I do know it's a stainless steel pan. From the looks of it, it's probably a higher end pan, like an all clad or something like that. But I'm not 100% sure. Can pans age out? Yes, they can, but depending on the pan. So most quality pans can last a lifetime, but that also means that they're more expensive. Now you can get like cheaper made pans, and typically the first thing to either go out of them is going to be the non-stick coating on it, if it is a non-stick. If it's a stainless steel pan, it should last a very long time. If it's cast iron, it should last for your grandkids. You just have to be able to treat them well. And I think that's probably the most important lesson of the entire thing is that all the pans can last well if you treat them properly. The only stickler in that is that pretty much every nonstick pan is going to have a shelf life on it. Now, there are new technologies with like the hex clad pans and there are Hexclad and a couple other brands are doing a version where it's basically the stainless steel is raised in a hexagonal pattern, and then the nonstick is between those hexagons, basically. So when you scrape it, even with a metal spatula, it's not scraping the nonstick; it's actually scraping the stainless steel. Now, that's a clever workaround, but time will tell to see how those last up. A lot of them will be like, "Oh, you can just like cook anything on that and it won't stick to it." And that's actually not the truth. It still needs a little bit of something to be able to make sure that things aren't going to stick to it. And you might be whole food plant based, but I think the biggest test for that is always an egg. Can you throw an egg into a pan with nothing else and is it going to stick? It typically always is going to. Um, and so, yeah, but pans can age out, but usually it's going to be a non-stick pan. If you're buying stainless steel, if you're buying cast iron, those are going to be the ones that are going to last the longest. Aluminum will tend to have a shelf life to it as well too. So just think about the material that you're buying it in. That should be able to help you out, Diane. All right. Deborah, do you have any career advice for someone who wants to become a whole food, plant based personal chef? I'm especially wondering how to build credentials and gain experience without having to work with animal ingredients. Yeah, so I was a personal chef for years, years and years, and had a kind of a good list of clientele. Now, the way I was discovered by these individuals was by working at a whole food plant-based cafe, basically. Now, this cafe was in a Whole Foods market in Austin, Texas, and we did 100% whole food plant-based. Well, that's not true. It was a raw and whole food plant-based. So we did raw food that contained oil in it, and then some of the meals that we did had oils in them cooked as well. But we did have a big emphasis on whole food plant-based as well. So that's probably what I would tell any, aspiring chef to be able to do is to get a job at a restaurant, in the cuisine that you're most interested in. So finding a place that has whole food plant-based, or at least looking for a place that is, plant-based and, working hours there, get a part-time job, just to be able to kinda get in and get the experience with that really helps out a lot. Now, because of that, just my cooking, people saw what I could do, and liked it and wanted to be able to hire me from that as well. Now, beyond that, I also kind of built up a reputation by doing chef demos as well. So I was at a certain time in Whole Foods Market, they had in-store chef demonstrations, and I would do those almost daily for Whole Foods Market. That was my job. But we also had other people that would come in and do them like once a month or something like that. And there were paid versions of this and there were unpaid. The unpaid ones are typically brand specific. So, say, I don't know, like there's a certain company that's trying to advertise, we'll just say cacao because it came up earlier, right? So you can approach that company and say, hey, I'd love to be able to do a cacao demo and I'm going to do, hands on, like where I'm basically showing how to be able to cook an ingredient from beginning to end and come up with this final dish. And through your expertise on that, it's great to be able to put on your resume, but it's also good to be able to see clientele that will watch you do these demos. You can team up with different cooking schools where it's basically like they're one-off kind of cooking schools where they'll have one event and say like, like Sur La Table does like a lot of those. And there are a couple other venues that'll do, cooking events like that, where it's like they'll have a chef come in and do like, a certain number of dishes and show people how to be able to cook those. Those are wonderful ways to be able to not only build your resume, but also build, the credential, the experience to be able to kind of start out in your personal chef world. Now, that being said, starting out as a whole food, as just as a personal chef, you want to not be like, okay, like here I am, I'm going to charge you, $1,000 an hour to be able to do this. You want to set the expectation at a certain level and say, this is what we're going to start at. And, especially if you're learning, say, we're going to learn this together. So I'm going to charge you X amount for the ingredients. Then I'm going to put a charge of how much it's going to cost me in my hours to go on top of that and start with that and give them that expectation like like this is how much we're going to do, but as your skills increase, then you can increase your price to be able to match basically what you're doing for those. So instead of putting, I don't know, like a third charge on top of your ingredients or something like that, um, you can start to increase the amount of money that you're actually, charging for your services. But just remember when you're first starting out, if you don't have the credentials for that, you want to be able to take baby steps to be able to get to that. So just keep that in mind when you're starting out. If you can and you can find a place that just does plant-based food, go work for them. Like that's a great way to be able to do it. That is how I, learned a lot. And remember, like to learn as much as you can from your peers, because you will learn a lot from all the people that you work with. As far as not doing any work with any kind of animal products can be tough sometimes in certain kitchens. So if you're specifically like, I don't want to touch animal product at all, you have to look for specific, places that'll let you just do that. Now, if you have a full-time job already and you're like, "I'd like to do this, but I don't wanna do it full time," consider volunteering hours to be able to do it and to be able to do it, just to be able to learn. Now, depending on the size of the place, like if it's a big corporate company, they're probably not going to let you do that, but a lot of restaurants will, if it's just like a one-off restaurant. So keep that in mind for all of those. It'll help you get the experience, help you get the credentials and the confidence to be able to start doing personal chef work. I hope that helps. All right, Terrell, what were the challenges along the way of making your passion into profit, and how did you overcome these challenges? Wow, that's a big question. Let's see, making my passion into profit, and how did you overcome these challenges? So that's an interesting thing because I had a kind of a different, like, way of coming into food as a living. I didn't ever consider food as a living when I was growing up. I actually went to school, the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. So I went into journalism right out of school. I, went to New York City and worked for Rolling Stone right out of college. So it was kind of a different thing for me. And I found food after going into another career. I was in real estate. And when the economy crashed in 2008, I was looking for something else to do. And after a lot of kind of soul searching, realized that Whole Foods Market was a good fit for me, just uh, in my thinking and the way that I liked to approach kind of life. And they just had a really interesting way to be able to look at different things as a grocery store. And I thought it was a cool company. Knew a lot of people that worked for it as well, and had some connections there. And so kind of like was a little bit convinced by some other people that worked for Whole Foods to go work for Whole Foods. Now, some of these people were kind of higher up in the company, so Um, I didn't want to really, go out there and say, "Hey, you should hire me because I know so and so." Um, I started as a dishwasher, literally, and worked my way up as quickly as possible. So I worked my way from a dishwasher, like within a week, literally days, to a waiter, which I'd never been a waiter before. And then started working at a restaurant within the store at Whole Foods Market, that vegan and raw food place that I was talking about, pretty quickly. I had been, a vegetarian for 20, like, well, now it's like 25 years. Then it was probably 15 or so. Um, years. So I knew how to cook vegetarian, was a good cook. My mom, was helped put herself through college and law school by doing a catering business, and I helped her out with that a lot. So I was also a vegetarian at a time when you couldn't find vegetarian food at a restaurant. If you did, it'd be like a side of mashed potatoes or beans or something like that, right? So it was a harder time. So because of that, I had to take those challenges in front of me and just learn how to cook. And I took those and used it to my advantage. And because I knew how to cook and go with big flavors, the restaurant basically brought me right into it. And it evolved me to another position where I started doing the job I was talking about, where I was doing cooking demos, and then evolved my career basically, from there. So it was really interesting for me because I wasn't really looking for a profit in the food world. It just kind of found me. But then I took it and started at a very small place and made it go as big as possible as quickly as I could. So I was at Whole Foods Market for about I guess that was probably about 6 years, and then went to Whole Kids Foundation, and I think I was there for another 7 years or almost 8. And at Whole Kids Foundation, I specifically worked with, educating teachers on, the benefits of good nutrition, so they could be better mentors to kids. So I did cooking demos for them, and then developed a program for, food service workers, where I basically did the same thing for them, wanted to show them how good nutrition can be a huge influence over kids, and they, as food service workers, could do the same, and specifically had an emphasis on scratch food cooking. And that emphasis on scratch food cooking basically helped me to be able to travel around the country and train, wow, over 45,000 school food professionals at various school districts around the country. And so that kind of kept evolving. So each kind of thing over years kind of kept gradually taking me to different places. Now, of course, there were things in between all of those. I've been board member on Slow Food. I've been a board member on the Child Institute of Nutrition. A lot of different things in between there, just because of those passions. Now, that passion really led me to all of those, right? So, following your passion, I think, is probably the best thing you can do. Um, Even if you have to have something else to supplement it out. Like a lot of these jobs that I had, I was doing other jobs to be able to supplement my passion. And finally, my passion paid enough to be able to do that. But it took years to be able to get to that point. So I think I'll end that there. That was kind of a long question, but there's the answer for you, Terrell. All right. What are some of the elements to the path becoming a chef you would have wished to known prior to rising in this industry? Um, the elements, to becoming a chef, and I think that the word chef is kind of thrown around a lot lately. Everybody calls me chef. I never went to a culinary school. I worked in kitchens basically to be able to learn a lot of what I did outside of learning at home as well. But to rising in the industry, I think the best thing you can do is to get into a kitchen, right? To get into a commercial kitchen. The bigger the better, the more well known, and probably the better. Because if a restaurant is a good quality restaurant and they have high standards, then your learning is probably going to be around the same thing too. So I tell students this all the time, like if you're looking to increase your education beyond what you're doing at Ruby, probably the best thing for you to do is to get a job at a restaurant as well. After you graduate, while you're, in the middle of Ruby courses as well, because your hands-on experience is going to teach you more than you can fathom. And you're going to learn a lot from your peers. You're going to learn techniques. You'll be criticized by your peers as well, to be able to say, nope, you're not doing that right. Here's the way you should do it. And keep an open mind while you're doing it. The more that you learn, you'll find yourself teaching other people that are coming in as well, which really helps you get even better at your craft. So I think that's really the best thing I can give you as advice, is to uh, go into a restaurant, work around a lot of different people, continue that process to be able to keep learning, and that's probably the best thing you can do, as a as for your career. Now, I think I missed the pursuing a private chef as a career. Oh no, maybe this wasn't. Are there any pointers you have for people pursuing private chef as a career? So I kind of gave you the answer to that a little bit ago, but it's basically, if you're looking to become a private chef, is being able to kind of get out there again, get in the public eye as much as you can, learn as much as you can to be able to get the qualifications you need, but also to be able to get in front of people so people will actually hire you. Start out small. Don't take off a bigger bite than you can chew. You're not the executive chef at a $1 million a year restaurant to start out, right? You're starting small, and just remember that and be humble about it. All right, so Jane, I made a red sauce recently. And it was a little bitter. Is adding sweetener the answer, or is there another option? Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not without knowing what you're putting in your red sauce, it's a little tough. A lot of, Italian recipes for red sauce will add just a little bit of sugar into it to offset some of the acidity of the tomato, depending on the tomatoes you're using. But, you could add a little sweetener to it. You could also do a little carrot puree, like we were talking about earlier on the stock, might be a good answer to that. But without knowing exactly what's in your sauce, it's hard to kind of deconstruct what to talk about and how to make your sauce less bitter. But feel free to email us. I can always help you dissect that as well too, Jane. And our email, of course, is just our first name at ruby.com. Diane, how do you get that crispy edge on roasted foods? It hasn't worked for me yet. Thanks. Heat. That's probably the best answer I can tell you. So if I'm doing something on, like, say, roasted tofu, so I'll typically have my tofu marinated. I'll press the tofu first. You want to try to get a good amount of moisture out of it, and then of course you're going to marinate it, so you'll add the moisture back in. But like if I'm doing crispy tofu, I'm typically going to put it in about 350 to 375. Put it on a sheet pan. I'm not gonna put anything else on the sheet pan. A lot of people will be like, "Do you spray it with oil?" You could, but if I'm trying to avoid the oil, I'm just gonna put it on the sheet pan just as it is, and then I'm gonna take actually a metal spatula and scrape underneath the tofu to kinda make sure I keep that crispiness on the bottom, and flip it over and try the exact same thing again, about the halfway point, basically, to be able to get that. Now for other vegetables, it's kinda the same thing, right? So, high heat, and then convection oven works great as well too. And then kind of moving it around, keep it in a little bit longer than you'd think. So you want to be able to see some of that browning happening onto it. If it's drying out, add a little bit of liquid, a little vegetable stock to it. But just looking for those crispy edges, that brown on the end of it is really the best way to be able to look for that. Hope that helps, Dan. All right. Also, Diane, sometimes lately when I've sauteed Latino kale with garlic and water, it's been bitter. How can I prevent that bitterness? So, two things. One would be to massage your kale. So, when you cut up your kale or whatever you're doing to it, try to open up the pores in the kale a little bit. Will actually help to be able to absorb some of the water, get rid of that bitterness as well. And also, watch the garlic and the water because if you overcook garlic, it can become very bitter, especially if you're just doing it in a water, saute. So try doing your kale first and then adding your garlic afterward. Even in the video we showed earlier, a lot of people put these shallots and the garlic in before you put your mushrooms in, which is the technique they show there. I actually err on the side of putting the garlic in after you already have your mushrooms starting to caramelize because you don't want to overcook that garlic because it can become very bitter if you're cooking it, especially if you're doing it in water. Another trick that works with kale, I don't know why this works, but if you add just a little bit of lemon to kale, which is bitter, it actually makes the kale taste less bitter. I'm not 100% sure what the science is behind that, but I've seen it work thousands and thousands of times from making kale avocado salad and different things like that as well. Um, I guess that's three things. Massage the kale, add the garlic a little bit later, and then add a little bit of acid, like a lemon or something like that to it. All right. Our next one is what is coconut butter and how can I make it at home? So, coconut butter is actually kind of like a coconut oil, and you can make it at home. I've done a couple different versions of it. I've actually done a coconut butter where it's actually like I'll add nutritional yeast and use it like a butter as well. But it's basically, um, you know, kind of using a food processor and chopping up the coconut meat basically kind of down as far down as you possibly can. Um, and it turns into almost like it's like kind of a pasty liquid basically. So you can add other things to it like a salt. You can add vanilla to it, which is, kind of a normal thing as well. You can also add a sweetener to it as well too if you want, but basically putting it into a food processor, shredded coconut that is, and blending it up until it churns basically into a butter. Now you can buy that in a jar. There are a lot of different companies that will sell coconut butter as well too, but that's basically the process is taking the little bits of coconut and processing it down into a butter and churning it almost. So that's what that is, Janet. Carol, many pan sauce recipes will end with a pat of butter swirled in. Any suggestion for a replacement? Um, yeah, so uh, I'm not 100% sure what recipe you're thinking about to be able to put a pat of butter swirled in. You could absolutely just keep it out. If they're looking to be able to add um, just a little bit more liquid, probably a vegetable stock. It's hard without knowing what sauce you're talking about. It's not just coming off the top of my head um, because a lot of sauces do have a lot of butter as kind of a key ingredient. Um, Patrick, what was that you said there? Oh, okay. So, probably that's just to kind of, add a little bit of liquid, basically. So your vegetable stock is probably a good thing, and it's also gonna help deglaze the pan a little bit to be able to get some of the crispiness off the bottom of the pan as well too. If you're doing plant-based, you can always do a plant-based butter as well, but that's basically kind of an oil that you're getting through that as well. So a vegetable stock is typically what I would kind of add to something like that. All right. Carol, that's the last one. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us at the Ask Me Anything hours. I hope we got to all your questions. And of course, we'll be doing this quite frequently. So, if you have more, just look for the Ask Me Anything office hours coming up in the next couple of weeks. Have a great day.